Boker Tov, everybody, and welcome to Hi There with Rabbi Leah. Good to be back with all of you again. Thank you so much for joining me. And it's Tuesday morning. I hope you all had a wonderful Memorial Day weekend and that you had an opportunity to honor some of the military heroes that you know and that you knew during your lifetime, and certainly that you had an opportunity to think about at least and honor those heroes that we have in our lives right now, those who are on the front lines of taking care of so many of our COVID patients, as well as those who are maintaining daily life so that we can live comfortably and free. I promised that today was going to be a culmination to our study of Pirkei Avot. And our timing is great because Shavuot is on Thursday night and Friday morning. And as I mentioned right at the beginning of our study, that this major work of rabbinic literature is something which is customary to study between Pesach and Shavuot, those 7 weeks that it took us to get from our redemption in Egypt to the foot of Mount Sinai, waiting breathlessly on shpilkes to get the Ten Commandments and the Torah. So we are going to complete the study of at least our study. We haven't studied every Mishnah of Pirkei Avot, but we did study the entire first chapter. And just as a reminder, there are 5 chapters altogether. The first chapter, which we studied, gave us the chain of the passing down of the Torah. So starting with Moses on Mount Sinai, then Moses giving it to Joshua, and Joshua giving it to the men of the great assembly. The men of the great assembly, actually, I got that reversed. Joshua gave it to the prophets. The prophets then gave it to the men of the great assembly. And then the last member of the great assembly was somebody by the name of Shimon Hatzadik, Simon the Righteous, who then began to pass it on to some individuals. And then we were introduced to 5 pairs of rabbis, the last of whom were Hillel and Shammai. And as we studied that chain of transmission, that Kabbalah, or Shalshelet HaKabbalah, the chain or the links of that transmission, we end up knowing that it gets to us today. We're still studying it, even though Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers, is hundreds and hundreds of years old, actually thousands of years old. So we know that much of the focus on this particular book of the Mishnah, this particular tractate, is on major themes such as showing kindness to others, respect for other people, respecting God, seeking peace, taking precautions to avoid transgressing. That means not deceiving somebody so that they stumble into sin, always checking out whatever you may have doubt so that you don't inadvertently mislead somebody, being humble, being involved in prayer, combining your Torah learning with labor. It's not supposed to be one or the other. It's supposed to be a combination of both. Not exploiting other people, not exploiting the way someone learns or the way someone works, being careful with things you say, not seeking rewards, but having the doing of whatever it is you're doing, whether it's Torah study or work, being its own reward, not leaping to judgments of other people, being fair and deliberate in legal decisions, taking action now, not waiting until tomorrow, because we are not guaranteed that there will be a tomorrow. So doing Torah study now and so on, trying to have an even temperament and making sure that the punishment matches the crime. So the rabbis of Pirkei Avot were very concerned about the the judicial process, acting fairly, treating other people with reverence, with kindness, and with a degree of justice, so that when there was something that had been done improperly, that individual was um, given the adequate but not a lesser or a greater punishment. And so the style of Pirkei Avot is really not like anything else that we see in the Mishnah. And more than anything, I love it because it seems to give us a real insight into who these ancient rabbis were, personality wise, because you could tell a lot from what they say um, about how they lived their lives and what they believed and so on. So now what we're going to do is we're going to move on to some of my favorite Mishnahs from Pirkei Avot. I'm having a little disagreement between two of my dogs because I gave them treats before I started this lesson this morning so that they would be quiet and behave themselves. But there seems to be a little argument about what belongs to whom. So excuse that growl that you just heard in the background. Okay, so we're going to move on now with some of my favorites in Pirkei Avot. And as we're moving along in the chapters, I feel as if we are moving closer and closer to Mount Sinai, because we will finish this up today. And on Thursday in our lesson, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Jubilee, what is so important and significant about the number 50 and the 50th year and so on. And then Thursday night begins the Chag, the festival of not Simchat Torah, of Shavuos. I'm a few months ahead of myself. So we are now in the month of Sivan, and Sivan is the third month of the Hebrew calendar. We had Nisan, which is the month in which Pesach occurred. Last month was the month of Iyar, and now we are in the month of Sivan, and the 5th of Sivan, the evening of the 5th, and the day of the 6th is Shavuot. So let's take a look at some of my favorite Mishnahs from Pirkei Avot. So if you recall from earlier in our study, much of this part of the Mishnah was written during the time in which the Jews had been basically carried out of Israel. They were living in Babylonia. Some were still living in Israel, but the Greeks and the Romans had invaded Jerusalem. We're going to see the temple in Jerusalem be destroyed. And so these rabbis were trying to maintain a sense of what being Jewish, what Judaism was about for them, always with an eye on the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem at some point in time. So they never gave up on that hope. And much of the writing in the Mishnah is geared towards that. And some of these sayings are also geared towards that. In other words, if you want the Messiah to come, there is a certain way you need to behave. So one of the last Mishnahs that we read, that's enough, Tootsie, that's enough. One of the last Mishnahs that we read, she loves this one, by Hillel. Hillel used to say, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? Yet if I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? And we get some warnings from some of these rabbis about not getting too close to the government. And in chapter 2, Mishnah 3, we read a Mishnah that I think is so prescient. It could have been written by somebody today when looking at our government nowadays and some of the things that we've seen. And it says the following: be careful in your relations with the government, for they draw no man close to themselves except for their own interests. They appear as friends when it is to their advantage, but they do not stand by a man in his time of stress. That is really incredible. Be careful in your relations with the government, for they draw no man close to themselves except for their own interests. So I think it was Ronald Reagan who once said that the one of the greatest fears is hearing the words, "Hello, I'm here from the United States government, and I'm here to help you." Because even as early as the first century of the Common Era, over 2,000 years ago, we have a rabbi writing that the government is not to be trusted. They're not there to do you any favors. They're going to con you into being their friend and supporting them. And then guess what? They appear as friends when it is to their advantage, but they do not stand by a man in his time of stress. So it's wonderful for you to be supportive of the government, but don't get too close to it. Don't make too many friends, because guess what? The minute you don't serve them anymore and you aren't there for their benefit, they didn't have the expression throw them under the bus, but that's basically what this particular Mishnah is saying. Enough said on that one. Mishnah 14 of chapter 3 says the following. Rabbi Dosa ben Hyrcanus said, sleeping away the morning, drinking at noonday, childish playing, and sitting in the meeting houses of the unlearned remove a man from this world. So let's break that one down a little bit. First of all, the name, Rabbi Dosa ben Hyrcanus. A very unusual name. And Hyrcanus is clearly not a Hebrew name. And the Ben Hyrcanus means that he was the son of this guy by that name. And remember, at the very beginning of our study, I mentioned that because of the acculturation that was taking place in the land of Israel, and also because Jews were now not living necessarily only in Israel, but were living in other parts of the world to which they'd been exiled, they began to pick up some of the habits and some of the names. So Dosei ben Hyrcanus is definitely a Greek or a Roman sounding name. So it was not uncommon, even in those days, for Jewish families to name their children names that didn't sound peculiarly or very much like Jewish names, much as Jewish families nowadays name their kids, Brittany and Tyler and Taylor and Madison and Brooklyn and Lexington and all kinds of names that you don't know if it's a man, a boy, or a girl necessarily. They're very androgynous names, some of them, but they're certainly not like Sarah and Rebecca and Leah and Rachel and David and Michael and Adam and some of these other Jewish names like maybe your generation might have named their kids. Okay. So he used to say, if you sleep away the morning and then at noontime you're drinking and then you are playing childishly and sitting in the meeting houses where the unlearned sit, in other words, not the study houses, but the meeting houses where they get together to play cards and smoke and drink and just chatter away the afternoon, that will remove a man from the world. Now, I don't think that Rabbi Dosa was talking about that somebody was actually going to physically be removed from the world, although those sorts of habitual practices like sleeping all day, drinking all afternoon, sitting in the meeting houses, and being involved in frivolous activities, and possibly some activities which might get you involved with unsavory characters, was certainly a waste of time. But I think Rabbi Dose was really talking more about a quality of life. and that when you spend all your time sleeping, drinking, carousing, chatting about Nourishkeit, nonsense stuff, that removes you from living a good, holy life of integrity. So we know that the rabbis were not concerned solely with Torah study because they all had occupations as well. And we know that, they divided their day up so that they were studying part of the day, sleeping part of the day, and working at their occupation. Everything was divided evenly. But being involved in these frivolous and sometimes these activities that were looked down upon got you into trouble, so that you really weren't leading the best life that you could be leading. So Rabbi Dossi definitely had some judgments about certain kinds of people. Then, a little later in chapter 3, in Mishnah 21, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, it says that he used to say, where there is no Torah, there is no culture. And where there is no culture, there is no Torah. Where there is no wisdom, there is no fear of God. And where there is no fear of God, there is no wisdom. Where there is no knowledge, there is no discernment. And where there is no discernment, there is no knowledge. Where there is no food, there is no Torah. And where there is no Torah, there is no food. Wow, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was pretty long-winded. He had a lot to say. And one of the hermeneutical, or the one of the ways in which some of these Mishnahs are written is to show different ends of a spectrum, and how without one thing there can't be the other thing. So in a nutshell, what Rabbi Elazar is saying is balance is the most important thing to life. And you can't just have Torah study all the time. You have to have culture as well. And if you don't have one, you don't have the other. Where there is no wisdom, there is no fear of God. And in Hebrew, the word fear and the word awe are the same word, yireh. So where there is no, if you are not knowledgeable, you can't have an awe of God or a fear of God. And similarly, if you don't have some sort of a reverence and an awe of God, you probably aren't a very wise person. And I don't think wisdom necessarily means strictly book learning. I think it means being worldly wise as well, which in this time did come from knowing Torah and learning how to live a good life. Then where there is no knowledge, there is no discernment. So what is discernment? Discernment is being able to distinguish between one thing and another, being able to distinguish something in the case of the priest that was pure or impure, or in the case of a regular human being, something that is true and is not true, something that is good for one to do and something that may not be so good for one to do. So if you don't have knowledge, you can't discern how to behave. There is no discernment. And I think of an example nowadays of people who use Google or Wikipedia or something like that as their main source of information. There's so much online that is dubious, that has to be checked out. And if you are using those sorts of resources to make decisions, you may not be using real knowledge to make those decisions. So how does one gain real knowledge? Through study, through Torah, nowadays through teaching and learning and so on. So if you want to be a person who can really discern the truth from a falsehood, reality from a hoax, you need the knowledge to do that. And to gain that knowledge, you would want to rely on those who are experts in their field. So we can parse that out a million ways right now with regard to what we are going through with this horrible pandemic. But I think that most people make their decisions, they're able to discern what sort of behavior they want to engage in by relying on the knowledge that they gain from experts in the field. And so if an expert says that it's going to take X number of years possibly to produce a vaccine, these are the ways you can behave in order to protect yourself and keep yourself from possibly infecting other people, then we have knowledge by which we can discern, make decisions about our behavior. I think Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was pretty smart. And then the very last thing he said, where there is no food, there is no Torah, and where there is no Torah, there is no food. And there are two ways we can look at food. We can look at real food that you eat for physical sustenance, and we can look at food as nourishment in in less of a physical way, but more of a spiritual or an intellectual plane. And the actual saying in Hebrew is ein kemach, ein Torah, ve'ein Torah, ein kemach. Where there is no kemach, which is flour, Flour, there is no Torah, and where there is no Torah, there is no flour. So you need both. You need physical sustenance and you need spiritual and intellectual sustenance. And you cannot forego one for the other. Otherwise, you'll starve to death. And if all you do is eat and you have no intellectual and spiritual sustenance, you will die a different kind of a death. So he was pretty smart. And that is a very, very famous Mishnah from Pirkei Avot. Okay. From chapter 4, Mishnah 1, Ben Zoma said, "Who is wise? He who learns from all men. As it is written, I have gained understanding from all my teachers. Who is mighty? He who subdues his passions, as it is written, one who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and one whose temper is controlled than one who captures a city." So we should learn from all people because maybe they don't have PhD or MS or some other kind of CPA or MBA or something like that, or JD after their name. But one who learns from everyone is wise because everybody has something to teach us, whether that is something positive or maybe not so positive. We learn from all these different interactions. So Ben Zoma says, I've gained understanding from all of my teachers. Maybe it wasn't the kind of understanding I was looking for, but I did gain understanding and wisdom. And then who's mighty? Not the guy who walks around tough, bullying people, hitting people, yelling at them, and so on, but somebody who subdues their passions. Because being slow to anger is better than, being somebody whose temper is out of control. And the one who is quiet, subdued, is thoughtful, that's the one who's controlled and captures the city. In other words, gains the most from their control of their temper. Who is rich? He who rejoices in his portion. As it is written, you shall eat the fruit of your labor of your hands. You shall be happy and it shall go well with you. You shall be refers to this world, and it shall be well with you refers to the world to come. So who's happy? The person with their lot, who's happy with their lot in life, not the one who says, I wish I had, I should have had, I could have been, why don't I have this and that, and so on. So the person who is satisfied and acknowledges that what they have is enough, that's the person who is happy, not only in this life, but in the world to come as well. And then finally, Rabbi Ben Zoma said, who is honored? He that honors his fellow person, as it is written in Samuel, 1 Samuel, for those who honor me, I will honor, and those who despise me shall be treated with contempt. So, honor, reverence, respect is a two-way street. If I honor somebody, respect who they are as a person, hopefully they will treat me the same way in return. Okay, couple more. From chapter 4, Mishnah 17, Rabbi Shimon used to say, there are 3 crowns, the crown of the Torah, the crown of the priesthood, and the crown of kingship. But the crown of a good name surpasses them all. And I think that this one might be very familiar to many of you, that we do talk about 3 crowns. We talk about Keter Torah, the crown of the Torah, because the Torah is a holy book, and it is to be revered like we would a monarch. The crown of the priesthood, because the priests, again, the Mishnah was always hoping for the day when the temple would be rebuilt and the priesthood would come back, and the priests wore a crown. That was part of their official uniform. And the crown of kingship. And we know that the real kings wear crowns. But then, what is better than all these crowns? The crown of a good name, because it surpasses them all. So if you live a good life, if you have integrity, if you act fairly and justly, and you don't lie, and you treat other human beings with kindness and with righteousness and with generosity, that crown is better than any crown you could wear on your head, because you were a king or a priest. Which means that we can all be kingly or queenly in our own right. All right. From chapter 4, Mishnah 19, Rabbi Yanai used to say, it is not in our power to explain the well-being of the wicked or the sorrows of the righteous. So we should stop trying to figure out why good people suffer and why bad people seem to come out on top. And this has been going on for thousands of years. And Rabbi Yanai says to us, guess what? It's not within our ability to know. It's not within our power to explain it. Only God knows. And so if you see a wicked person, somebody who acts like a bully, somebody who lies, somebody who is mean, and they seem to come out on top all the time, and on the other hand, you see this wonderful, righteous, loving, generous, kind soul who seems to have nothing but sorrow and grief and tsuris in their life. Only God knows. It's not within our power to figure it out. So that might not be a satisfactory answer, but at least that's what Rabbi Yanai used to say. And finally, one of my favorite Mishnahs of all, Ben Bagbag, and yes, that was his name, Ben Bagbag, used to say of the Torah, turn it and turn it again, for everything is in it. This is what he said of the Torah. Pour over it and wax gray and old over it. Stir not from it, for you can have no better rule than it. So read the Torah over and over and over again. Turn it and turn it and turn it again, for everything is in it. Everything you need to know about how to live life is in the Torah. Pour over it. Get old and gray studying it. and don't remove yourself from it, because there is no better rule in life than the Torah. So that concludes our study of Pirkei Avot. There is so much more in it. We only did the entire first chapter and then a smidgen of some of the other chapters. And most of it is really fun like this, and you learn a lot about the rabbis and their personalities. Don't forget to join me tomorrow afternoon for Jewish News and Views. Boy, there's so much that we can look at, and we haven't done this for a couple of months, so I'm going to be bringing you some interesting articles from the Jewish world, talking about news within the Jewish world. That is tomorrow, Wednesday afternoon. Thursday morning, we'll be back here again for Hi There with Rabbi Leah. Thursday night, blessings for Shavuot. Friday morning services, Friday night blessings, Saturday morning services, Saturday night Havdalah. Phew! And then maybe Sunday we'll all rest a little bit. So, Lahitraot, thank you so much for joining me for Hi There. Take care of yourselves, wear your masks, wash your hands, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.